This is Sports Jam. I'm Doug Doyle. We have a very special guest today. He created the first all-sports talk radio station, WFAN. He's the founder and chief executive officer of MS Communications and is the former owner of the Seattle Mariners. Jeff Smulyan joins us. Great to have you on the show.
My pleasure, Doug. Looking forward to it.
You came out with your new book late last year, Never Ride a Rollercoaster Upside Down, the ups, downs, and reinvention of an entrepreneur. And what I love about your story is that, and you write about it in the book, is even though you have had tremendous success in building brands and owning iconic radio stations across major cities like New York, LA, St. Louis, Chicago, New Orleans, you admit you haven't always made the right decisions. And I think that's refreshing, Jeff.
Well, Doug, yeah, I have a favorite saying. The line between being a genius and an idiot is very fine. And I've been on both sides many times. I even have a chapter in the book called Idiot to Genius, which is the start of sports radio, and Genius to Idiot, which is my tenure owning the Mariners. So I think, in life, anybody who tells you they haven't failed at anything doesn't count very well.
I think you have a very good perspective on what sports talk that you created has really meant to the culture of today's game and media. You say that sports talk changed the way coaches and athletes deal with the media. I want you to explain that a little bit more because I think it's a great point.
Well, as a matter of fact, probably the best example is my friend Jerry Reinsdorf, who described it. But, before sports talk radio, you were a player or owner or manager, and there was a column written about you in the newspaper that was unflattering. You read it, you put it down after you finished your breakfast, and that was it for the day. But with sports talk radio, it was really 24/7, nonstop commentary, nonstop critiques. So if you got ripped on a sports talk station, that discussion may continue all day. So you may have played a game, and at 10 o'clock at night, you get in your car and you hear them talking about you. The next morning, you get up and you're hearing them talk about you again. My friend Jerry Reinsdorf, who was on a trip to Seattle when we owned the Mariners, said, he said, I'm not a religious man, but to think that the guy who invented the format that really ruined all of our lives because we went under a microscope all the time. The guy who invented that format that's really made our lives much tougher is now a Major League Baseball owner and is getting ripped by his creation, proves to me there's a God. So I think that's probably the best summation of the whole story.
You really have enabled the fans themselves to come up with trade ideas that have always been ludicrous through the years. I remember when I talked to Jim Lampley on the show, and he talked about being, an early host on WFAN for you, and how it was insane with some of these trade ideas, and it still continues today.
Yeah, every day. I mean, listen, I live in Indianapolis, and the debate between C.J. Stroud and Anthony Richardson and Will Levis has gone on for days and days and days. That's sports fans. People care passionately about their sports. It's, Karl Marx said that religion is the opiate of the masses, but today in America, sports is the opiate of the masses.
Speaking of that passion, you as a young kid listening to sports and top 40 radio on your little transistor radio. Yeah, that little thing that both you and I had. The magic of radio, it really grabbed you, but it's never really let you go. Why is that?
Well, I think once it becomes a part of your life, this is a medium that I care deeply about, even though we've sort of now moved on to other things. I stopped off at an industry dinner a couple weeks ago because the friends you make in the industry, the people that you know, the experiences you've had really define your life. So I've loved the medium. I started as a young man and gone all the way through my career with it.
You're joining us from Indianapolis, as you mentioned, and there are a bunch of photos behind you. And one of the things I love to do about a Zoom interview, Jeff, is to see either an office or a room that may be special. Is there an item behind you, a frame, a picture that really means something to you?
Well, there are so many. I'm looking around. I mean, I have a lot of, I guess, the famous pictures back in another part of the office, the presidents and people in sports and other dignitaries. But behind me is my family. And if you look on my desk, there's more family. And there's so many of them. There's a picture I'm looking at with my sister and my wife and daughter and son and grandson and daughter-in-law. Pictures of my parents, my late parents, So there's a lot of family here. At the end of the day, it's family. Seems like on this side, I have mostly my grandchildren, so a lot of family.
It's interesting that, I've been in radio for many years, but my parents really never listened to the radio except for school closings. How about your parents? When you had that transistor, did they talk to you about radio?
Well, when I had the transistor and I was listening to a ball game late at night, or top 40 radio, I think they just said, turn it off and go to bed. But yeah, I mean, radio was a part of our lives then. I think, as we morphed into the television generation in the 50s, I think most people, radio became more of a niche, business that really specialized in my generation, top 40 radio, and then, other genres. But, I think the baby boomers really had a place for radio. Radio was pronounced dead in the early 50s when TV came along. But I think radio really sort of reinvented itself, as it seems to always do, as I'm hopeful it will do again.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that. What is the future, not only of sports talk radio, but radio itself?
Well, I think sports talk has a little bit brighter future than the medium generally. The key to sports talk generally is that people are passionate about their local teams and about the sports in general. I think with music, the problem is it could be replicated on so many streaming services that it kind of makes it tougher. I think it really boils down to make music stations relevant as having strong personalities and stations that are very involved in their communities. I think it's tough to do, radio music formats if it's just piped in from somewhere else and they can't relate to the people on the air.
Take us back to the days at USC when you had the idea popping into your head, a crazy idea. Seemed like the same kind of idea that WBGO had when they said, hey, let's go 24 hours jazz. And they said, what?
Yeah.
And so, when you were doing that, other people were saying, just like they were saying to the jazz station, this isn't going to work, but you weren't going to stand for that.
Yeah, I had the idea when I was not paying attention in class. I have 2 degrees from USC, and I'm very proud of it. It's my alma mater. I've been on the board for many years, but I'm not going to lie and say I was paying attention all the time. And it was sort of tucked away in the back of my head. And years later, when we bought WHM, the AM station in New York, I mentioned it and said, we it's our first AM station. We mostly were built on FM. I'd like to do all sports, and everybody said, "What an epically stupid idea." Lampley, who you mentioned, called it the Vietnam War of Emmis. My managers didn't want to do it. They finally said, "Yeah, let's do it. We owe you one." But it was clearly an idea. The first year and a half, it was called Smulyan's Folly, and one of my best friends in the business said, I used to think you were a smart guy, and then I listened to that thing, and I realized you really are not very smart at all. But then we merged it with NBC. We put the frequency on 660. We put Mike and the Mad Dog on and Dynamis, and it became the place for people to go to sports. And then it became, one of the biggest radio stations in America.
It's Mike and the Mad Dog on the fan. Got the cooking fire, turn it on and try 'em. Mike and the Mad Dog, WFAN.
Good afternoon, everybody. The Mike and the Mad Dog radio program. Nice to have you with us.
Well, 14 years later, the Mike and the Mad Dog show takes a new little twist, and that is simulcast on the Yes Network.
You'll be interested to know that when I came up listening to radio in my first trip to New Jersey, New York, I had Howard Stern and Don Imus switched. I saw the billboard, and I said, oh, that has to be Imus, but that was Stern. I had them switched, and in my head, it was hard to get them through.
We went through this yesterday. The different standards you apply to, say, people like your wife and women at say who dance in these clubs, and I don't it doesn't make any sense to me. Let's just do sports and then Strom Thurmond. Come on.
Imus in the morning, 2020 sports.
Late Don Imus, you had a good heart towards him, didn't you?
Yeah, I thought I had known of Don long before, listened to Don long before we inherited him. When we first put Fan on the air, we thought about Don because he had a crossover audience. He was a sports fan, but he could talk about anything. And in those days, people said, God, nobody's going to want to talk about sports at 6 o'clock in the morning. But Don was under contract to NBC, and we brought in Greg Gumbel. But I was a big fan of Don's. It could be challenging, make no mistake about it. Randy Baumgarten, who came with us, had run WNBC and had managed Howard and Don at the same time. And we had some fun discussions discussing the difference between what managing Howard Stern was like and what managing Don Imus was like.
You have a lot of great stories in your book and a lot of things that are behind the scenes that some people don't know. There's a whole tale about George Steinbrenner and Buck Showalter, and even Susan Waldman gets mixed into that. Tell us a little bit about that one.
Well, Susan was the first voice on the air of WFAN, and in those days I would be more involved. And I said, "Boy, she's terrible." And I said, "Gee, she's not a great reader." And they assigned her to the field where she became probably the greatest sports reporter of all time. A few years later, we were in Seattle and the Yankees were playing there. We were in the press box, and I said, "Susan, who's the best young manager in baseball?" And she said, "Jeff, I think the next great young manager is Buck Showalter." And we were on the verge of making a change, and we flew Buck Showalter out. He had just been fired as one of the Yankees coaches. George Steinbrenner fired the whole coaching staff. So we flew him out to Seattle for an interview, and there was a story in the paper about Showalter flying to Seattle for a manager's interview. And Steinbrenner said, "Wait a minute, why do they want him? I just fired the guy. Get him back here." So he came back to New York. Steinbrenner interviewed him, and immediately hired him as the manager of the Yankees. So I always say Susan Waldman's comment launched, Buck Showalter's managing career.
And now look at him; he had a wonderful season with as the skipper of the Mets. And the Mets have to mean something to you because during that run at WFAN, it was right after they had won the '86 World Series, and right. It was Mets mania at that point.
It really was. We had bought the station and had WHN before we switched it in '86. So I went to we carried the games. I went to all the games. I still can remember sitting there behind home plate, right near the Red Sox family section when they're the infamous 6th game with 2 outs, when the scoreboard flashed, "Congratulations, Boston Red Sox world champions 1986, for just a nanosecond." And we were laughing, boy, somebody put that up prematurely. And then the Mets had one of the great rallies of all time, and they won the game and then won the 7th game. I'll never forget that as long as I live.
The Seattle Mariners haven't had the success through the years that the Yankees or the Mets, but you were the owner at one point, and I've heard you talk about you love the job, but it was the economic issues that you had to face. But you know what? There are still owners today, as you well know, that are facing the same thing. What advice would you have for those struggling franchises?
Well, there's been so much capital poured into baseball, and you've had so many more billionaires. I talk about it in the book. The big change is you've had so many billionaires who bid up the prices. The underlying economics are still challenging in small markets. And I said, look, we needed to be a billionaire to own the Mariners. I used to joke and say, we couldn't afford to lose $15, $20 million a year for a long period of time. And I said, to own the Mariners, you had to be a billionaire, but to own the Yankees or the Red Sox or the Dodgers, if you had a paper route, you were okay. The economics are just wildly different for different teams.
What's been the most interesting response to the book so far?
I think the thing that's been most gratifying, and it has been one of the most gratifying experiences I've ever had. So many people have written me notes and said, "Boy, I learned so much, and you made me laugh." And the lessons that came through were just great. It's been, I think, more surprising the fervor that people have had for the book. It's been, very gratifying. When you do something like this, you write it and you hope people tell you it's good. But when you get a number of people that you don't know or people that you know peripherally or haven't talked to in 40 years send you notes and say, "I love the book," it's been very, very gratifying. And I think the good thing is hopefully the stories are interesting. It'll make people laugh, but hopefully they'll take away lessons that'll be helpful in their lives.
You and I have so many passions that are the same. We like sports, we love radio, and we also love history. And so here's a little history question for you. If Jeff Smulyan woke up one day on a deserted island and you only had that small transistor radio, but it was magical. And you could go into the past and be listening to one announcer, whether it be sports or music. Who would that be and why?
Well, I think it would be Edward Murrow, really reporting from London. I am a history major. My daughter's now a freshman at Georgetown. She's a history major. We talk about this stuff all the time. I think, I was not there. I obviously grew up with Walter Cronkite, and Brinkley, and, and all, I was a big fan of all of them. I'm obviously a news junkie. But I wasn't around when Murrow was reporting during the bombing of London. I've always been so fascinated by how we could really have a world with an Adolf Hitler. And I think listening to Edward Murrow's reports from London, plus some of his later work, I think pretty remarkable stuff.
I wanted to ask you, because it's something that we think about a lot, especially those of us who are still in the radio business, is that one of the reasons sports talk survives is because it has that local feel and it has that interaction between the listener and the host. But when it comes to music, that's gone away a lot. We've had a lot of cookie cutter music programs playing the same music. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think, it is funny. I think that's been, a problem for the industry. Commercial broadcasting, with consolidation, you had so much debt that was taken on. And then as the economy got worse and the radio industry got worse, then it was, how do we service the debt? And then it was add more commercials and cut a lot of the local people and cut a lot of the operations. And I think it did not help the industry. Listen, music evokes the same passion. I mean, we all have our favorite bands. We hear songs all the time that, evoke great memories and great passion. But, for a radio station to work, I can still remember when I was listening to in college, KHJ, which is one of the great top 40 stations in America. It's like you hear the same song in KHJ and the same song in another station. And for some reason, it just sounded better on your favorite station. I'm not sure why that is, but I guess it was just all the things around it that just made you feel better.
Well, we're a jazz station here, and I don't know if you're a jazz fan or not, but I do want to know if you have a special anniversary coming up and any band could come to perform for you. What band would that be?
That's a great question. I don't know. I guess, I love the Beatles. I love the Rolling Stones. I love Kenny Loggins, Bruce Springsteen. My daughter, as a favorite treat when she graduated, grew up with old music like me. So for her graduation from high school, we got the chance to go to Europe and see the Stones in Milan, Italy. And it was a memorable thing because it was so much fun for her. So I don't know. There's a lot of bands, a lot of music I love.
Your book, as the title, talks about being on a roller coaster ride. So as far as your lifetime and what you've gone through in this radio business and being on a roller coaster, is there something that you've learned about yourself from writing this book?
Well, I think I learned, I think I learned that how much the relationships matter to me, how much the culture of the company mattered to me, how proud I was of the things that we stood for in the company. I also, when I went back and realized some of the decisions I did make, I probably realized how stupid I was. But I think it was the experiences, the lessons I learned, mostly the relationships. I think that's what you take away. I know I've had a couple friends who've said, look, your problem was you always wanted to do the undoable. And you always took on challenges that nobody could do because you thought they were so fascinating. And then you read the book, you realize they did a few of those things. But I thought they made life more interesting, even though, trying to get an FM chip in every phone and get, or trying to use the spectrum to distribute over-the-air TV, or my original idea to talk about the book, which is my revenue sharing idea, baseball. They were all ideas that required a collective action from people who weren't necessarily excited about working for the collective good. So, but those are the kind of the challenges that I've loved. I've loved doing what I've done and doing it with the people I've done it with. There's so many people that are with me now that have been with me 20, 30, 40 years. And that's been incredibly gratifying.
This book is a real inside look at the life of Jeff Smulyan. And you would think from all the mistakes he's talking about, there were very few mistakes. Let's be honest, that you've had a tremendous career and success. And everybody who has worked for you that now works for WBGO wanted to say hello to you, because there are several of them, and they all had high praise for you as a top executive. And that's not easy in this business when you have to manage so many people. Is there a moment that stands out for you other than creating sports talk radio and that you say, put that one on my site when I leave this earth?
Well, I think the culture. We wrote the 10 commandments. How you treat people, have fun, never jeopardize your integrity. I think those are the things that I'd like to be known for. It's incredibly gratifying when I've heard from so many people who used to work with us who say very kind things about the culture, and it was the best place they ever worked. And when, I have a favorite saying about management is that I've never met anybody who walks in the door in the morning and said, how do I screw up my job? So, our job is as leaders to try to give them the tools to be successful, but nobody, I think I've been very proud about that.
Just two more questions here on SportsJam. You almost took an NBA job once, and I know that you kind of regret that you didn't. If you were offered the opportunity again to own a sports franchise, would you jump at it?
Well, I think so. I mean, the problem is the valuations have gone so crazy. But if somebody said, Jeff, I'm going to give you a free NFL team, yeah, I would take that all day long, knowing that, the value of the franchises has grown so much. I mean, we were talking yesterday that, there are probably 25 million people who watched the draft last night. It has become, I'm sitting here looking at your, Lombardi picture. I grew up in the urban Lombardi, and football was a nice sport, but it was secondary to baseball. And today, football, 90 of the top 100 programs in television are NFL games. So it has become, the by far the biggest thing. So yeah, if somebody gave me an NFL team, I would gladly take it.
It is amazing what the NFL draft now has become.
Yeah.
So the last question is, you could live really anywhere you want. Why Indianapolis?
It's home. My family's been here over 130 years. When I went away to school at USC, I thought I'd never leave California. When I got out of law school, my dad taught me, I always wanted to start my own company. He said, come back home and do it. Talked me into it. The first 6 months, I said, what have I done? And for the last, 45 years, I've really loved it. I've had chances to be everywhere else, but it's home. And I think home is always home. I've been very proud to be part of some things that, have helped shape this community, and it's been very gratifying.
Well, that helmet behind me is Marcus Allen for USC. And if my dad was still alive, he probably wouldn't like me anymore, because he was a big Irish fan. And all those games with USC, ones that we cherish. And I've cherished your time here on SportsJam, Jeff Smulyan. Continued success to you, and thanks so much for creating something that people enjoy each and every moment today.
Thanks, Doug. It's been a pleasure. And I will tell you, I'll close by telling you that as a USC fan, I've driven home from South Bend many nights, now with the game at night at 1:00 in the morning after the Irish have beaten us. So it's a great rivalry, Doug.
It certainly is. Thanks so much, Jeff.
Thanks, Doug. Thank you.
SportsJam is a WBGO Studios production. You can hear all the past shows by going to WBGO.org/SportsJam or WBGO.org/studios. You can also find SportsJam with Doug Doyle on the NPR list of podcasts or wherever you hear podcasts. Until our next SportsJam session, I'll see you at the game.